Tonight, Shirley, Nishmat Avimarido, Bear, Halevi, Imi Marati, Rachel Bat Harav Michael. Before I start, I want to wish Rita Mazel Tov on the birth of two grandchildren, a twins, a grandson and a granddaughter. Mazel Tov. You should be able to watch them grow and in good health for many, many years to come. Okay, so this Shabbos we have the privilege of reading Parshat Pinchas, which is in Psukim. It's one of the longer parshot of the Torah. I think it's number two, if I remember correctly. But the bulk of the parsha deals with two primary topics. One being the census that is taken by Moshe in year 40. The second is the carbonot, that all the communal carbonot that are brought throughout the year. We're going to focus on something that's related to the census as a result, and we're going to try to understand exactly who is being counted and why they're being counted and what this count is all about. So that's what we're going to try to focus on tonight, if we can get moving and not have any more technical difficulties. Okay. 1 minute. Okay, and away we go. Okay, so we're in chapter 26, which, as I said, deals with the census that is taken in year 40. It goes through each of the tribes. It goes through the tribe of Levi individually, separately, and in between tells us that these are the people who are being counted now, are those who are going to inherit Eretz Yisrael, are going to share in apportioning Eretz Yisrael. And then it tells us the following summary in verses 63, 64, and 65 of chapter 26. It says, Ela Pikudei Moshe, these are the countings, or that Moshe counts, the Elazar Kohen, together with Elazar, the Kohen, Asher Pakdu, that they counted at Bnei Yisrael, Bi'avot Moav, Am Yisrael, in the plains of Moav, Al Yarden Yerecho, literally on the east bank of the Yarden, opposite Yericho. And in this count, there was nobody included Moshe v'Aaron HaKohen, from the counting that Moshe and Aaron had done. So we should not confuse the fact that and think that here we are 40 years later. This is a completely different census. It is not to be confused with the previous census that was taken. Because Hashem had said to them, the Am Yisrael who was counted in Midbar Sinai, Mot Yamutu Bamidbar, they would die in the desert. Ish, and there was not a single man left from them. Ki im Kalev ben Yefuneh v'Yoshua ben Nun. The only two who survived from that generation were Kalev ben Yefuneh and Yoshua ben Nun. Now, the question that we're going to try to address is, who, when this pasuk says that nobody is included, who does it mean is excluded, and who does it mean is included? So we're going to try to understand that a little bit and understand the rationale behind those who are not included, perhaps in this decree that they will all die in the desert. So Rashi begins with very, very simply telling us, Ube'ela lo haya ish, it says there was no man, aval al hanashim lo nigzara gezeret hamraglim. The decree that was Hashem promulgated against Am Yisrael because of the sin of the spies did not include the women. Why? And Rashi gives a reason, because they loved Eretz Yisrael and they were anxiously waiting to go into Eretz Yisrael even 40 years earlier. How does Rashi prove that? Because we know that the Anashim, the men said, after the Meraglim came back, the men said, Nitna Rosh Neshuva Mitzrayma. Let's get rid of Moshe, appoint a new head, and go back to Egypt. However, Vanashimon wrote, the women said, Tenu lanu achuzah, we really want to inherit Eretz Yisrael. Lekach, and because the fact to remind us that the women were not included in the decree and that they loved Eretz Yisrael, lekach nismecha parshat benot tzalafchad lekan, and that is why the immediate next parsha that we read after the census is the petition of the daughters of Tzlafchad, who requested their father's share since he had no sons, and they wanted his share in Eretz Yisrael because they loved Eretz Yisrael. Ramban. Ramban says, why did it say Ela Pekudei Moshe Elazar HaKohen? Here, after we've counted all of Am Yisrael and we've counted the Leviim, Ramban wants to say Al Pekudei Bnei Yisrael. These are the countings of Moshe and Elazar, is referring back to the fact that they counted Am Yisrael, as the pasuk says, Shabaktu Bnei Yisrael B'Arvot Moab. It does not include Ein Pekudei HaLevi Bichlal. The counting of the Levi, the Leviim that Moshe does here, is not included. It's a different census. It has nothing to do with the census of Am Yisrael. Ki bahem, it is only concerning Am Yisrael, the rest of Am Yisrael, excluding the tribe of Levi. Ki bahem lo yamar, concerning the tribe of Levi, did not say ube'ela lo haya'ish, that there were no people who were left. Shelo nigzera hagezera al shevet Levi. That not only were the women not included in this decree, but so too the tribe of Levi, the males, were not included. Kedivrei Rabotenu, as Chazal tell us, v'ha'ed, and the proof is Elazar gam Pinchas, that Elazar, who was Aaron's son, who was already born and over 20 when they left Egypt, is not included. He's still alive. And his son Pinchas, who was also listed when they were still in Egypt, he also is included in, is still alive and is going forward and is going into Eretz Yisrael. So Ramban says clearly the tribe of Levi is not included, as well as, of course, the women. Now, the question that Ramban is going to deal with, we say that there was nobody included in both census. That the people who were included in the census 40 years ago were not included in this census, and the people who were included in this census were not included in the 40 years ago. So Ramban has to figure out how that works out. And he's the following: Ki Yoshua v'Chalev lo hayu ata b'pikudim ha'eleh. The two people who the Torah specifically mentions have survived, Yoshua and Kalev, are not counted. So when we look at the count in our parsha this week, there are two people missing from the count. They are Yeshua and Kalev. Why aren't they counted? Because they were already over the age of 60. And if we look at the count is from 20 to 60. That when Am Yisrael is counted in this week's parsha, it's only from the age of 20 up through the age of 60. It does not include people over the age of 60. So since Kalev and Yoshua are over the age of 60, they're not counted. Now, why only 20 to 60? Ikar Yemei Ha'ish. They are the primary years of strength of the person to go out to work in Yahamur Be'arachain, as we see in the parsha of evaluations, that once you hit age 60, your worth goes down, you get diminished, you reach a little bit maturity, a little bit post-maturity. The Azu Yotzei Batzava Israel. Only between the ages of 20 and 60 do you go out and fight in a battle. You join the army. The Lomi Shishim Ulamala Kediver Rabotenu. Like Chazal tell us that once you hit 60, you have to retire if you're in army service. That's it. 60 is the absolute gag. Aval. Amar v'lo notar behem ish. It says there was nobody left. Kim Kalev ben Yefune Yoshua ben Nun. Nobody was left of the previous generation except these two. Why? Shahayu min hapekudim harishonim. They were included in the first count v'lo metu, and they didn't die. So the pasuk singles them out not because they are included in this count, but because they were included in the previous count and are the only two people from that entire count who are still alive, according to Ramban. Okay, the Netziv. Ela pekudei Moshe v'Elazar kohen asher pakdu b'nei Yisrael. Hachi mibai lichtov ela pekudei b'nei Yisrael. It should have said these are first. It should have said these are the pekudim, the countings of b'nei Yisrael asher pakdu Moshe v'Elazar kohen. Why does it start with ela pekudei Moshe v'Elazar kohen asher pakdu b'nei Yisrael? It should start with ela pekudei b'nei Yisrael asher pakdu Moshe v'Elazar kohen. So the verse seems to be in inverted order. It's the same language that we use in the Sefer Bamidbar. Amek Navar says no. When it says these are the countings of Moshe and Elazar that counted Am Yisrael, it's also counting the Leviim. Shepakduo Tam Moshe Elazar, that Moshe and Elazar also counted the Leviim, even though Hashem doesn't explain to them that they have to. Mishum Hachi Hechel Hakatuv Eila Hainu HaLeviim Shemedaber Bahem. The fact is, it's Eila Pikudei Moshe that's talking about the Leviim, who we just read how they were counted. So they were included in the counting of Am Yisrael, even though they started age 1 month and up, as opposed to Am Yisrael, which starts at age 20. Hema Paktu Gam HaLeviim. Moshe and Elazar counted not only all of Am Yisrael, but also Leviim. Ukemoshe Katuv Im Bnei Yisrael. And that's why it's as if the pasuk says the Leviim are counted by Moshe and Aaron together, that they counted together with Am Yisrael. That it should be read as if it's Im Am Yisrael, not Et Bnei Yisrael. Af al gav shlo hayatzarich inyan sheipaktu heim Leviim. There was really no reason for them to count the Leviim. Back 40 years ago, the Leviim are counted for a number of different reasons. Here, they're going into Eretz Yisrael. There's no reason for them to count Leviim. They're not going to the army. The Nimtza yesh lazeh amikra shtei mishmot. So this verse has two different interpretations. Be Yisrael mashmot bifni atzmo. That concerning Am Yisrael, it's in one sense it means that they were counted from 20 and up. But Leviim bifnei atzmo, and in reference to Leviim, they were counted for a different reason, different age group. Ucheila harbe b'Torah. And there are many cases in the Torah where it uses a language that might refer to two different subjects, even though they have two different meanings. The same verb, the same usage, has two different meanings in reference to two different individuals or groups that it's referring to. Uba'ela, it included in this group, there were nobody left. Hi Uba'ela miyuta. It says this word Uba'ela is extra. V'hachi mibai v'lo haya ish. It should have just written v'lo haya ish, not ube'ela lo haya ish. Why does it add the word ela in these? Avol kvar kotva tosus b'avabas daf kuf chaf aleph b'shem hamidrash shenishtayru chamesh esrei elef shalom eitu. 15,000 of the 600,000 people who were counted in Har Sinai did not die. Why didn't they die? Because the Gemara there says, Medrash there says, I didn't bring it down, but Medrash says there that each year, approximately 15,000 of the 600,000 died. Divide 600,000 by 40 years, you get 15,000 every year. And in the last year, Hashem rescinded the decree, and there were 15,000 who did not die. And that's, by the way, one of the reasons given why we have the holiday called Tu B'Av. I don't want to get into that right now. Umikol Mako. However, nonetheless, these 15,000 lo ayu b'pekudei Moshe Elazar, they were not counted when Elazar counted. V'chein nira, and similarly it appears that the Leviim, af al gav shelo nigzar aleim gzeirav darazeh, even though they were not included in the decree that they all had to die in the midbar, were also kama mehem nisharu, and many of them survived. Not all of them, by the way. Steve says not all of the Levium survived. Some of them may have died naturally, died for other sins, but they were not included in the sin of the Meraglim. So therefore it is highly possible, the Steve says, that many of them survived and were still alive. Kamosha Mevi Barabbas. It says in Midrash Rabbah, Rayam Elazar. Proof is, as we saw from Elazar and Pinchas, it doesn't say that Elazar and Pinchas were also survived from that generation in addition to Kalev and Yoshua. So therefore, many of the Leviim survived the 40 years. They were alive at the end of the 40 years. Mikal Makom, nonetheless, even those Leviim who survived are not included in the count, just like the 15,000 that survived from Am Yisrael were not included in the count. That's why it lists Uva Ela. In these people that Moshe and Elazar counted, there was nobody left from the people who had counted, Moshe and Aaron had counted, including the Levium, including these 15,000 who survived, and including Kalev and Yoshua. None of them were included in the new count. Perush b'minyan haLeviim b'Yisrael d'mayre b'hem. in both of these counts are only counting people who had not yet reached the proper age 40 years ago in the first count. So there is not a single individual who is included in both counts. And that will explain why we have this extra word uba'ela. It doesn't say lo haya'ish, it says uba'ela. It doesn't say that nobody survived. In other words, the Netziv is saying, yes, there were people who were included in the count, in the original count, who survived, but they were not included in this new count. In other words, one of the rules for being included in this count is that you hadn't been counted in the census 40 years ago. Ella, and this tells us also that the Levium who survived, were not included in this count. By the way, Netziv is focusing on the fact that the number of Levium only goes up by 1,000 during 40 years. It goes from 22,000 to 23,000, which seems pretty strange if all the Levium were still alive. If all Levium survived, how could we only wind up one? And he's saying no, that these are 23,000 new Levium who were all either underage. No, they couldn't be underage. They were counted from 1 month up. Who were either under a month old when the first count happened, or were born during the 40 years. Just like, again, the whole 600,000 people who are counted here are all either were under the age of 20 or had been born in the desert. Ki amar Hashem lahem, because Hashem had told them, who is the them? Koyal b'nei Yisrael d'salik minayu. In other words, it's only referred, the only ones who were told that they would die in the Midbar was Am Yisrael, not the Levium. But again, that doesn't mean that none of the Levium died. There were among the Levium who died, but no matter whether they survived or they died, they weren't included in this count. Mot yamutu b'midbar, even though the decree was they would die in the desert. Mishum haki, because there was a decree against them. Aval gav shenishtayer harbe barachamei shamayim shenicham al hara. Even though Hashem, there were many who remained because Hashem forgave the last year's worth of the sin. Nonetheless, nobody remained. Yotzei tzavah sherayu l'minyan. Those people who survived, who were still alive from the original count, were all beyond the age where they could serve in the military, and hence are not counted in this count, because the specific purpose of the count is to see how many were of military age. Kiyim Kalev ben Yefunav Yeshua binun, except for Kalev and Yeshua, Hemayu Yotzei tzavah. Even though they're beyond the age of 60, according to the Tiv, Yeshua and Kalev are counted, and they are, because they are going to go out and fight. Yeshua obviously is the leader, Kalev obviously is as a participant, but unlike Ramban, who says the Kalev and Yeshua were not included, the Tiv says they were included in this count. Abar now. The Achar Shehishlim Minyan Ha'am L'Shivteim. After we have this whole long count, and it goes through each tribe and counts each tribe. Amar Katuv, the pasuk tells us, Ela Pekudei Moshe ve'Elazar HaKohen. These are countings of Moshe and Elazar. Shepaktu Afnei Yisrael Be'arvot Moav Al Yodei Nirecho, as we read in the pasuk. What does this pasuk come to add? Lahagi, the Barbanel tells us, Ki lo nismach haminyan hazeh al haminyan acher shenimnu b'midbar Sinai la'shavota. We should not make any attempt to put the two next to one another and try to compare them. But to make us understand that this was a separate count, al yidei Moshe ve'Elazar, and it was done completely from start to finish by Moshe and Elazar. Just like the counting that we read about at the beginning of the 40 years, at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, was done through Moshe and Aaron. The Amnam, however, nonetheless, it tells us, there was nobody left from the counting of Moshe and Aaron. Why was there nobody left? As we read. Nobody was left except these two. Why does it add that? Why does the Torah have to add that? Inyano, Ladad HaMefarshim, Shalohaya Be'ela Ish Mipikudei Yisrael Shniftu B'Bar Sinai. Again, to tell us that among Am Yisrael there was nobody left. Rabim. There were many of the Levium who survived. Doesn't say they all survived, but many Levium survived the entire 40 years. They view Raya, and the Gemara brings a proof from that. That both Elazar, Aaron's son Elazar, and his son Pinchas, both were alive when the Jews left Egypt, and both were among those who entered Eretz Yisrael. The Samchu Zel Pasuk Bamidbar Azeh Yiplu Pikrechem Achol Pikudechem Achol Misparchem Benesim Shanav Amalash Lenotam Olai. And they again, this is to teach again the same pasuk to tell us that all of them would die. So Hashem tells us everybody would die. Rashi, what does it mean? What does this pasuk say? All of those who were counted and all those who were the numbers who were included. Everybody who was counted in the count that was from age 20 to 60, 40 years ago, they are the ones who the decree was against. Those are the ones who were included to be included in the army and to pay give the half shekel. Everybody who was included in those counts was going to die. The Elohim, and who are they? Only those who are counted from the age 20 and up. Lahotzi, to exclude Shivto Shalevi, She'ain Pikudei Miben 20 Shana. That excludes the Leviim who were counted not from 20 years and up, but they were counted from 1 month and up. This is all he's quoting from Chazal. However, he says now, this doesn't work. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Why? If you're telling me that the Leviim are not counted, that everybody died, this pasuk was trying to tell me if you're telling me that the Leviim were not included in the decree and Am Yisrael was included in the decree, then this pasuk that says in this group of counting there was nobody should have been listed not after the counting of the Leviim, but after the counting of Am Yisrael, because you're telling me that Leviim, there were some who survived, and there were some who were counted again. So just again, Barbanel is saying that the pasuk that says these are the countings, plural, of Moshe and Elazar, we have to explain as referring to the counting of Am Yisrael and the counting of the Leviim. And similarly, when it says there was nobody left, I'm going to have to include that all of Am Yisrael was included in the Gezerah against the Meraglim, not just those who were counted from 20 to 60, even the Leviim. He says, now wait a minute. If the Leviim weren't included, I can prove that the Leviim weren't included in the Ched Meraglim. Why? Because there was no spy sent from the tribe of Levi. Wait a minute, now Barbanel says, there was none of the Meraglim was from the tribe of Levi. Why is that? The only reason that the tribe of Levi did not send a spy was because the purpose of the spies was to look at Eretz Yisrael. They weren't getting part of Eretz Yisrael, so they didn't need to have one of them go a spy from their tribe. Now you're going to tell me, wait, we just brought a proof that the Leviim didn't die because Elazar and Pinchas were alive when they left Egypt, and they were still alive when they entered Eretz Yisrael. Why? They're not included in the tribe of Levi. They're included in the tribe of the Kohanim, who are not counted together with Leviim. V'hataf, and the children, that the children who were still under the age of 20 when the first count happened, they were the ones who were going to enter Eretz Yisrael. Just like they entered Eretz Yisrael, so too the Kohanim all were eligible to enter Eretz Yisrael. So that's, Abarbanel wants to say that the Leviim are also included in the Ched of the Meraglim, and they were also supposed to die out. Oh, Now, how again you're going to ask, wait a minute. Again, the Kohanim excluding Aaron, because Aaron was already excluded from Eretz Yisrael. The reason Aaron didn't go to Eretz Yisrael was because of his part in the sin of the calf. And two of his sons have already died for his role in that sin. If the next two sons are going to die in the midbar, the only two Kohanim left, then the Kohana won't be left from Zerah Aaron. Aaron's offspring will all be dead, and there'll be no Kohanim left. So Elazar did not die because he was the only one left. Somebody had to survive from Aaron's family, and Pinchas was not yet 20. Even though he was born when they left Egypt, he was under 20, so he didn't count. Therefore, they, Elazar and Pinchas, those are again two more exclusions to the degree. But concerning the Leviim, even though they were closer to Hashem and they were more concerned about Hashem's honor, as we see from the Cheder Egel, that they were the ones who responded, it appears that even so they were misled by the Meraglim. And they were also included in the decree that they were all going to die in the desert. And see also that Moshe and Aaron were not able to survive this decree either. They also had to die in the desert. As Abarbanel explained when we read in parshat Chukat, where we read about Meim Rivah, Abarbanel's perspective was that both Aaron and Moshe had other sins, and that's why they couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael. They were also included in this generation. V'amnam. However, concerning the pasuk Shevi Rashi Lotziat Haliviyim Mihagzeira, the verse that Rashi wanted to use to include the fact that Leviim were not included in Gzeira, Kashir Ayun, when you will examine that pasuk, doesn't seem to make sense with the way the pasuk goes. In the pasuk in parshat Shlach, where the Gezerah against the Meraglim is promulgated by Hashem, it doesn't say only all those that were counted from 20 and up will die. To exclude those who were counted from a month and up, i.e. the Leviyim. Aval Amar, what does it say there? Shekol pekudehem lechol misparab, all of those who were counted in the number. Ritzoni Lomar, so Abarbanel wants to say, Beinotam shenimnu b'bein esrim kol yotzei tzava, not only those who were counted among Am Yisrael to go to the army at age 20, ubein osam shenimnu b'bein shloshim shana 50 shana shem haLeviyim. The Leviyim who were counted from age 30 to 50 were also included. They were also a count, and they were counted by Hashem. Therefore, they were also included in the decree. They were counted avodah to work in the Mishkan. Shekulam elu v'elu. Both of these counts from the Levium only from 30 to 50, Am Yisrael from 20 to 60. Biyotam b'nei Esrim b'nei Onshim, since they were already of the age of 20 when the Chet Meraglim occurred. Kivan shayu b'tzluna yamutu b'midbar. Since they were involved in the rebellion involving the Meraglim, they had to die in the Midbar. The nichlalu imkain b'gzera hazot, included in this decree, halaviyim im shara shvatim kol ish mi ben esrim shana v'mala. Everybody who was over the age of 20, including Leviyim, shayu b'tzluna. Now, the and Abarbanel is now going to bring a proof to that why he believes that the tribe of Levi was included in the Gezerah. V'imaya shevet Levi nakime hashmat hatzluna umigzeret mitei midbar. If the tribe of Levi had been specifically excluded, the Torah would have singled out the tribe of Levi and mentioned it and publicized that they were not included in this chet, just like it did in the Cheder Egel. Love Kol B'nei Levi. When Moshe said Mila Hashem Elai at the Cheder Egel, all of Levi came to assemble around him. So we see clearly that had they not been included in the Chet HaMeraglim, the Torah would have said something about it. At least that's Abarbanel's parish. The Never b'Mishnah Torah, and it says in the Sefer Dvarim, Ba'id Ha'iv Dil Hashem et Shevet Levi. That's only later that Hashem separates tribe of Levi. V'Yayakaz Omer b'Sipur HaGzeirah Zulati Halaviyim K'Moshe or Zulati Kalei Ben Yefuneh Yoshua Ben Nun. If the tribe of Levi was to be excluded from this decree, then Hashem would have specifically mentioned it at the time of the decree, according to Abarbanel. Ela Sha'emet Kach. The truth must be the following: when it came to the Egel, tribe of Levi stood out and stood on Hashem's side. When it came to the Meraglim, they were included with everybody else. And they were punished together with Am Yisrael. Similarly, at different sins that we read about along the way, different people were punished based on their sins. And now after this plague that just happened in Shittim, Hashem counts Am Yisrael again. Therefore, the Levium had to be counted again because some of them had died out through each of these individual sins, as well as the Chet of the Meraglim. Everybody was gone. Now we had to count everybody else, just like Am Yisrael had to be counted, so too the Levium had to be counted. This seems to me the straightforward interpretation. And so Abarbanel, as I said, comes down on the side that Levium were included in the decree. Notice he doesn't mention the women, and we're now going to go to the Kleyakar, who has a very, very interesting perspective on what happened to the women and why the women are spared. So we're going to go into this, and I hope we'll have enough time to finish it up. Okay. Kleyakar says the following: Avol nashim hayu. The women, there were plenty more women because even though all the men died out, the women did not. The only ones who were included in the gezerah that they had to die in the desert were the men. Why? As Rashi said, we saw in Rashi already, the men didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael. They were ready to go back to Egypt. The women loved the land. Because the daughters of Tzlaf said, we want our share of Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to give two explanations of this. What's the difference between the men? They didn't want to go into Eretz Yisrael, and the women did want to go into Eretz Yisrael. Kleyakar says there are certain countries, certain places that are more likely to raise people who are modest, and there are places that are more likely to raise people who are immoral. The Amru Chazal, Gemara says in Mamid Barabba, Shashitim, the place where they were camped now, which was Shittim, which is where the sin with Baal Peor happened, Hayam Gadel Noafim. The climate, the locale, the genre was conducive to raising immoral people. Lefikach Zanu b'Shittim, and that's why Am Yisrael sinned at Shittim. Ki yeshivat hamakom ahu garam lam liznut, because this place caused them to have lascivious, immoral thoughts. The Eretz Yisrael, however, the land of Israel, misugal bazesh ein haaretz sovelet zima. Eretz Yisrael is very different. It cannot condone immorality. K'moshen Emor parshat Arayot, as we read in parshat Kedoshim. Kiat kolato both in Acharayot and in Kedoshim. Kiat koltoevot aela asuan sheretz v'takiha aretz et yoshvela. When there's immorality in Eretz Yisrael cannot tolerate it, and it throws the inhabitants out. Ukvar katavnu lemala, and we already wrote above, Anoshim, the generation that left Egypt, hayu prutzim barayot. They were steeped in immorality. The Alkain sanu at hearts. That's why they hated Eretz Yisrael and didn't want to come in. The generation that left Egypt. Avlo hanashim, the women, hayu kesherot utznuot. The women were very, very good and modest. And there's one case of a woman who had illicit relations with had a child from an Egyptian. The Torah specifically singles her out as the only woman who didn't live up to the code of conduct that was expected. Therefore, they wanted to come in Eretz Yisrael because it's a place that moral people live, modest people who want to be appropriate live. The Teda Shehu Kain, and the proof is Shafilu Shitim, Hamigadel No Afim, even the place of Shitim, which grows, which is more conducive to immorality, Timashich Lo Reforming Aretz HaKadosha, will ultimately receive a boost of holiness, the healing of holiness from Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar Umayan Yatzami Beit Hashem Ishkat Nachal Hashitim, that a brook will come out from the house of Hashem and will water the stream of Shittim, and it will bring it to a higher spiritual level. And this is the reason why Nichtav will be Eilah Ya'ish Eitzel Hamispar Dafka. This is why it says there was nobody left. Specifically, we're counting these numbers. Lomar Lecha, to teach us Aval Nashim Hayu. There were lots of women. Through the counting is Tzniut Hanashim Yoter Miba Nashim Midahakim Hay Eliyut Kimavur Lamala. If we look at each of the names of the families in the counting of Am Yisrael in this week's parsha, there's a hey added at the beginning of each name and a yud added at the end of each name, which is the name of Hashem, which hints to the fact that of the modesty of the woman that helped keep the families together when they were going through Mitzrayim and when they were going through the desert. So that's number one. Number two, that's number one reason why the women loved Eretz Yisrael, because it was a makom that was more tzanua. Number two, Tam Shenihu. We know that there's a clear difference between Eretz Yisrael and every other country. Eretz Yisrael, we have Eretz Yisrael is a land that has more rain than Eretz Yisrael, or certain other lands that are. We think Eretz Yisrael has no rain. There are lands that are drier than Eretz Yisrael. However, be'eretz Mitzrayim, since in Eretz Mitzrayim there is no rainfall. The only way you get rain in Egypt is the rain that falls way upstream and floats down and because the Nile River. Since there's no rain, all fields, any crops that grow in Egypt have to be grown via irrigation, which involves a lot of work for the farmer. Just like we have to feed any other area we want to grow nice and lush and green, has to be watered. Since there is such a heavy load on the farmer to raise his crops, the Torah says, you know what? In Egypt, you don't have to give Truma and Masa. You don't have to give a portion to Hashem. Because it doesn't make, it's not justified that we should have to give a portion to somebody who didn't do any work. So clearly, what Kleyakar is saying is that in Egypt, the farmer has to do all the work. He doesn't get any help from Hashem. He's got to go schlep the water. He's got to schlep the seeds. He's got to dig up the crop. He didn't get any help from Hashem, so he doesn't have to give Hashem a portion. Aval Eretz Yisrael, but once we get to Eretz Yisrael, Shagashamim Yardim Sham Be'itam, that rain falls in the proper season. So the farmer just has to do a little bit. He has to plant the seeds and he has to plow and whatever, but he doesn't have to schlep water all the time to water the field. Nonetheless, yes, he does have to work with planting and plowing and reaping and all the other things that he has to do. However, Hashem has a portion in this field. Hashem provides rain in the proper season. That's why the crops grow. Al kain dinu sheyitnu mechelek gavoa lekohanim leviim mishartei Elokeinu ki mishulchan gavoa heim zochim. So it is appropriate that everybody should take a portion of his crop, give it to Hashem, or at least through Hashem to his appointed messengers to receive it, the Kohanim and the Leviim, since they serve in the Beit HaMikdash, they receive a portion, as he says, Ki mishulchan gavoa heim zochim. They receive this portion because it really goes to Hashem, and Hashem allows it to go to the Kohanim and Leviim. This is very clearly outlined in Parshat Ekev, where it discusses this whole concept of Eretz Yisrael being a land where there's always rain. The land you're coming into of Eretz Yisrael is not like Egypt. That in Egypt you have to irrigate all the fields. However, the land you're coming to now is limtar shamayim tishtamayim. You will be able to have water from the rain. And it's a land that Hashem looks over. He's concerned about it, make sure that it has the proper rainfall. Umasik v'Yalkut Parshat Ekev, and it explains in Parshat v'Yalkut explains in Parshat Ekev, Davka Otah Nitan Lidrisha. Only Eretz Yisrael does Hashem, who is Hashem, where Hashem is directly involved kiviyachol in the growing of crops. Davka Ota Nitan Lidrisha Lafrish Mimenu Chalo Truma Masrot. Specifically, there do we have to set aside a portion for Hashem, Chala every time we bake, Truma and Maser every time when we collect all the crops, the low shiur haratzot, and that's why Chala, Truma, and Maser are only in Eretz Yisrael, not in any other land. V'chol asher lo einayim l'rod v'leiv lahavim. Everybody who has eyes to see and a heart to understand, Yishtomem al hamareh, you will be able to look into the depths and see my inyan Chala Truma lakan. What does Chala and Truma have to do with rainfall? My mashman, this is what does it means? The otal and my chara told me Truma Maser v'lama lichtav mu'utzekan. What does this only that this is the land that Hashem looks at have to do with Truma and Maser and Chala? What does that have to do with it? Elavada, it must be sharata litain tam lamet sochayevet b'chala Truma Maser yoshim isharatzot. Why should a farmer in Eretz Yisrael have to give Chala, Truma, and Maser that he doesn't have to do anywhere else in the world? The Amar and the Pasuk is trying to explain Kol Torah Sholcha. In any other place, you got to do all the work. That even a field that grows wheat or any other crop has to be watered, has to be irrigated. You, the farmer, have to do all the work. Therefore, the Torah gives you a pitur from Truma and Maser. The land of Eretz Yisrael where you're coming into, limtar shamayim tishtamayim. The im kain chatzi amal shalcha v'chatzi shel gavoa al kain din shetiten chelak lavar mishartei Elokeinu. That's why we have to give a portion to Hashem. Now, that's all beautiful. Why we have to give to Abbas? What does that have to do with the women versus the men? Loving Eretz Yisrael. That's why the men didn't want to move into Eretz Yisrael. They were stingy guys who didn't want to give tzedakah. They didn't want to walk and leave a place where they were exempt from giving truma to all these things into a place where they were going to be obligated. And they said it every time they complained. We remembered how beautiful it was in Egypt. We ate things chinam. We ate things for free in Egypt. We didn't have to work hard. We didn't have to fulfill the mitzvah. We didn't have truma. We didn't have masrot. And the explanation is below truma to masrot. That's why they mention all these exotic vegetables. These things are, when we get to Eretz Yisrael, the rabbis impose the obligation to separate truma and maser from them. Since all of these things are things that grow only if you provide the water, Filu Eretz Yisrael, even Eretz Yisrael, there's not enough rainwater. You have to provide water for your vegetable crops. They need lots of extra water. They're 90% water. You got to put lots of water in to get the fruit out. That it says that this tour from Truman Maser is connected to the fact that since you got to do all the work, you get a patur. They're also exempt since you have to do all the work. However, nonetheless, Chazal said we have to give them, since they do take lots of water, since there is a shortage of water in outside of Eretz Yisrael, these things won't grow very well unless you bring them lots of water. The men didn't want to come into Eretz Yisrael because they knew they were going to have to give away some of their stuff that they, quote, worked hard for, and that's why they didn't want to come in. The women of that generation said, they were very righteous. They loved to give tzedakah. Whether it was the mitzvah of challah, which was unique for the women because they were the ones who were doing the baking, whether they were referring to the other Truman Masrot. They loved Eretz Yisrael to go to a place where they could perform this mitzvah. Normally, the woman is not the one who is running the household. The man is. Since they couldn't force their husbands to give when they were outside of Eretz Yisrael and they really wanted to give, they were excited to come into Eretz Yisrael where they could, quote, force their husbands to give. And this is exactly what it means when the Gemara tells us that it's only in the merit of the righteous women that we were able to leave Egypt. To teach us they left Egypt and were able to ultimately get to Eretz Yisrael that they really wanted to get to. That was where they wanted to achieve. And similarly, it says about the daughters of Sukkot. I'm going to stop right here because I've run out of time. But again, we see very clearly a very interesting way of looking at this concept that the women loved Eretz Yisrael either because they were very tzanuah. That was number one. Number two is because they love to give tzedakah. And we see clearly that women are generally are more likely because again, if we go back to there, the women are the ones who are running the household, who realize how hard it is and how challenging it is to be able to run a household and to be able to make ends meet. They realize that while their husbands are out working in the fields and what have you. And that's why they seem to be a lot more spiritually oriented. I thank you all. I think that's really what Clay Akar is trying to get at. The reality is that we always think, the women are nobodies. The Torah understands and the Chazal understood that we need the women. Without the women, we are nothing. And I think that's a very, very important and powerful lesson for all of us to learn. And as we see from all of these, the fact is that clearly the question, as I said, revolves around who is included. Clearly the women, obviously, based on all we read above, were not involved in the Chedem Raglim either, and that's why they are able to ultimately enter Eretz Yisrael. And we hope and pray that we should all see the beauty of Eretz Yisrael, want to love to live in Eretz Yisrael so that we can ultimately merit the Gula Shlem Meher V'Meinu. Thank you all for coming and sharing. I'm opening up for now for questions, comments, feedback, anybody. Just remember, if you're on mute, please unmute if you're on Zoom and you want to ask a question. Hold on. We got a question here. Maurice, go ahead.
Census.
Yes.
It was taken by donation of Harveship. Didn't count the people.
Okay. Right. Maurice says the first census was taken by everybody giving half a shekel. That's debatable. I'm going to stop you right there and say that's debatable. Now you can ask your other half of your question. Your question, how did we do this census? Yes. Great question. The Torah does not discuss it, whether this was by a half shekel or by Moshe counting everybody as they passed by. Great question. And the Parshanim are split down the middle on that, how this census took place. Okay? So that's a great question. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you all. Have a good rest of the week. a meaningful fast tomorrow and a Shavua Tov and a good rest until next week. Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
you.